This coverage is live and uncensored, so if you have any small children present, you may want to have them leave the room.
Another interesting thing about a lot of these exorcisms of children, one common theme throughout these was the involvement of Ouija boards in children. And it makes us really, we do need to be careful, certainly of Ouija boards, but various other ways that sort of thing is marketed for our children to play with.
This is your nautical lantern on the dangerous seas of darkness. Let's push off from the placid shore of the status quo and explore what's beyond the horizon. I am your host, BT, and this is Truth and Shadow, your podcast of the supernatural. Imagine we're on the brink of lifting a veil that, once pulled back, reveals mysteries ancient and unfathomable. Occult symbols, hidden knowledge, even depictions of the demonic, ideas that play with forces beyond human comprehension. These are not just quaint symbols or harmless stories. They are deeply charged representations. Think of something as visceral as The Exorcist. Should children experience that? It's not just a horror movie. It is a confrontation with darkness, with the idea of possession, of losing control, and that idea to a child's developing psyche is no small thing. From a psychological standpoint, exposing children to the occult or to demonic narratives isn't simply about whether it's too scary or too grown up. It's about how these concepts imprint on their childish subconscious minds. The mind, which is highly impressionable at that state. It mirrors what it absorbs, embedding these images with ideas far more deeply than we often realize. For instance, exposing young minds to occult or demonic material introduces themes of fear, control, and the unseen. It shows them that there are forces at play beyond their control, and that can create a fundamental shift in how they perceive the world. When children encounter horror movies or demonology, they aren't merely watching a story. They're grappling with the possibility that something dark, something powerful, might be real. And when a child believes in monsters, believes that true evil could be lurking in the shadows, it's not like an adult grappling with a concept. For them, it will impact their sense of security, their sleep, their interactions, and their ability to reason through irrational fear. And it isn't only about fear. The demonic and the occult both suggest a hidden order in reality, a world where power can be accessed through arcane knowledge or dark ritual. This can become a risky proposition for young, ungrounded minds. Children live in a world where fantasy and reality are often tenuous, where belief and imagination are fluid. The risk of letting them delve into concepts that blur these lines even more is high. A demonic presence or an occult symbol to them may not remain a character on the screen or in a symbol in a book, could become a real and vivid threat in their mind. But maybe we think we're empowering them, offering them a critical way to engage with darkness. There are arguments that these themes could make kids resilient, more curious, more daring. Yet child psychology warns against exposing them to themes of evil before they have a moral and cognitive framework for handling it. Fear and belief in the demonic can lead to anxiety, even obsession, and without healthy ways to process these themes, children can form maladaptive views of themselves and the world. There's an old saying, when you chase monsters, you'd better be careful not to become one. In our desire to empower children, are we really preparing them? Or are we introducing fears they're not ready to face? In the end, it's not just about what we give to them. It's about what we can never take back.
In the ever-evolving landscape of faith and spirituality, there are those who stand as stalwart defenders of truth, illuminating the path for others to follow. Today, we are honored to welcome a guest who has dedicated his life to exploring the profound depths of our Christian faith. Our guest is a distinguished Catholic author and has become a beacon for those seeking to deepen their understanding of the faith. His works resonate with both the seasoned believer and the curious seeker, offering insights that are as intellectually rigorous as they are spiritually nourishing. Join us as we delve into the heart of spiritual warfare, the role of the saints, and the power of the sacraments, guided by the wisdom and experience of our guest. He is the bearer of the sacred shield, defender of the mysteries, and fellow pilgrim on the road. Scott Smith, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. What an introduction. Wonderful.
Thanks. Well, I know a little bit about you because I happen to read a little bit of Catholic literature from time to time, but I would like you to tell the audience who you are and what your field of expertise is and how you got started as a Catholic writer.
Yeah, for sure. I'm an attorney, which I guess means I'm an expert at nothing, but I also went to school for theology, was a Jesuit novice, got a master's in theology. But yeah, I love to write about theology, particularly that wonderful intersection between Catholic culture and life, liturgy, and nerdiness, right? You know, whether it's Tolkien or one of my topics of interest is Exorcisms, written a book on that, I have a book coming out on near-death experiences. So, you know, some of the, I guess I just keep ending up in supernatural sorts of things. Also, husband, father, 6 kids, and also very interested in forming them in the faith. Written some books. One book with Father Donald Calloway, we did together the consecration to St. Joseph for children and the family. You know, so kind of bridging a lot of different worlds there, have a lot of different interests. I don't know, maybe I'll settle on one particular interest someday, but being a Catholic, I feel like is the gateway to many different interests.
Absolutely. One of your books was actually really awesome. I was looking at it, Lord of the Rings and the Eucharist, and that ticked me onto looking at it because it's like, well, we know that J.R.R. Tolkien was a Catholic. We know that he would probably write Catholic themes into his stories. I mean, it would only seem to follow. And you had taken the idea that llamas bread was a symbol he utilized to explain the Eucharist. Could you talk about that?
Absolutely. I've got some good quotes at the beginning of the book. It kind of, just to start with this, it kind of drives me crazy that more people don't realize or talk about how Catholic Lord of the Rings is. Like, there's lots of books about Catholic virtue and faith demonstrated, manifested in Lord of the Rings, but there's a lot more particularity to the Catholicity of Lord of the Rings. It goes much deeper than, not that the virtues aren't deep, but it goes much deeper. Tolkien actually admits, maybe admits is the wrong word, he straight up states that the limbus bread is the Eucharist in his letters. And I mean, he says wonderful things about communion. One of the great quotes he has on just the Eucharist is this one. People may have heard this one before. Out of the darkness of my life, so much frustrated, I put before you the one great thing to love on earth, the Blessed Sacrament. There you will find romance, glory, honor, fidelity, and the true way of all your loves on earth, and more than that, death, which is, in his typical fashion, so epic. One of his quotes, he says, "The Lord of the Rings is, of course, a fundamentally religious and Catholic work. Unconsciously so at first, but consciously in the revision. That is why I have not put in or have cut out practically all references to anything like religion, to cults or practices in the imaginary world. For the religious element is absorbed into the story and symbolism." And he elsewhere straight up states that the Eucharist and the limbus are one. So once you make that connection, realize that this is a profoundly Catholic work, you can follow those breadcrumbs, pun intended, from the limbus all the way back and all the way forward. So if you read with, look at the detail in the way he describes the limbus bread, not only when he's describing in the chapter of Mount Doom, he talks about how this way bread of the elves had a potency that increased as travelers relied on it alone. Just like the Stylites, the Eastern Fathers that would eat just the Eucharist. Even more than that, or more conscious than that maybe, is the leaves that wrap the limbus bread were from the tree, the Telperion tree. Telperion was one of the two trees in Tolkien's Eden. So it's not just that Tolkien has a Eucharist, Tolkien's also going to have a manna, an Exodus, an Eden. Like, all your foreshadowings of the Eucharist are going to be laid out by Tolkien. So that's what is also so amazing, is that his knowledge of typology and all of salvation history was so good, even advanced. So the recipe for the limbus bread comes from the elves' great journey from the undying land. It's the exodus of the elves. So just like the manna appeared like the dewfall on the exodus of the Israelites, so too the limbus bread comes from the elven exodus. So there's all that. Then you go back to the Eden, Tolkien's Eden, which is called Espolar, and you've got these two trees, Laurelin and Telperion, just like we had the two major trees in Eden, tree of knowledge of good and evil, tree of life. And it's the light of these trees that illuminates the whole world. And just like we have a serpent, the devil in the form of a serpent, really a dragon, right, an ancient beast, ancient mythic beast. In the same way, you have Tolkien's two trees being attacked by Melkor, right, who was before he went bad, he was Melkor. Afterwards, he became Morgoth, who Sauron was just his, henchman. So Melkor and Ungoliant. Ungoliant's like the mother spider, like Shelob is a descendant of Ungoliant. So just like you have a dragon and Satan attacking Adam and Eve in the garden, you have now a monster like the dragon and Melkor, like Satan, Lucifer, attacking the trees themselves. And so the trees themselves, because trees are alive, in Tolkien's mythos, they have their own very specific genealogy that goes all through the Silmarillion, ultimately becomes the sign of the return of the king, right? The health of the line of kings. There's even a point where Isildur takes the tree, and then as a sign of contrition for having done that, he puts the tree on an altar. I mean, it's all very, very biblically based. But the genealogy of the trees is much like the genealogy of Christ. It's also going to be like the genealogy of the kings of Gondor. So as you go forward then from Eden into the line of patriarchs, like you would in the Bible, you see that your next big stop is when the son of a king picks up his father's sword and slays a giant, just like David slays Goliath. After David slays Goliath, he becomes king, but because of his great sin, you have ultimately the kingdom of Israel will fail. The northern and southern kingdoms will fail, just like Isildur. So because of his fall, because he keeps the ring for himself, you have the northern and southern kingdoms, just like the northern and southern kingdoms of Israel, collapse. The northern kingdom collapses first due to the Assyrian captivity, the attack of the Assyrian Empire. The northern kingdom of men falls first, Arnor. And, all we have left of Arnor, and come time, the Third Age and time for Bilbo and Frodo's time, you just have the Dunedain, right? These remnants of the northern kingdom, one of whom is going to be the king, right? The return of the king. The southern kingdom lasts a little bit longer, just like the southern kingdom of Israel lasts a little bit longer, but eventually it falls too, more or less. It's ruled by a steward. And so what's interesting, just like in the Bible, the Messiah ultimately comes from the northern kingdom, comes from the north, right, from Nazareth. So to Aragorn, as a member of the Dunedain, comes from the north again. And there's all sorts of, it just goes on and on, how the various Christ messianic figures, Gandalf, it just goes on and on.
Yeah, one of the things in the story, when Frodo is given the light of Eärendil, and it's to use it when he's in his darkest hour, and he ends up using it in his battle with the spider, I believe it was. I'm looking at how this was for Frodo an act of spiritual warfare. And your own book, Pray Like a Warrior in Spiritual Combat, and the War Room, this idea of the light being given to Frodo to use in his darkest hour is likened to the book that you had written about spiritual combat, and also the reality of exorcism. So can you talk about for a minute the power of spiritual warfare and how it eventually led you to writing about exorcism?
Yeah, well, that's kind of one of the reasons I wrote a book on exorcisms. I'm fascinated by the subject. I think a lot of us are and should be in a safe way. We need to not become obsessed with it. I wanted a book out there that told the classic stories of famous exorcisms, right? The one that the movie The Exorcist was based on, Roland Doe. Annalise Michel, the one that The Exorcism of Emily Rose was based on. I wanted to present these stories, go through the primary sources, and present them in a Catholic way, in a safe way, in a respectful and reverential way, in sort of a subversive way, right? Like I packaged it like any other book on exorcisms, so people wouldn't be put off thinking, well, this is just a Christian book, But I put front and center at the very beginning of the book, I put the prayer to St. Michael, that you should not undertake anything with regard to this sort of subject matter without first praying the prayer to St. Michael, which I might pray quietly to myself right now. The this particular book, like I said, I kind of went through the different exorcisms that are included in it. And one of the things that I was struck by is I assumed that Hollywood was sensationalizing these exorcisms. And that is the case, but it's also not the case. For example, for the Exorcist movie, she's Reagan, Linda Blair is, spitting this terrible pea soup vomit. Her head's turning. She's leaping onto the ceiling. Words are appearing on her skin. Spider walking, all that sort of thing. Some of that is Hollywood creation. Some of it is understatement, if you can believe it. With the Exorcism, the one the movie is based on, Roland Doe is a boy, wasn't a girl. One of the vomit was striking. It was not so much Roland Doe's exorcism that came from. I think The Exorcist was an amalgamation. The movie amalgamated several stories into one, and one of those was Emma Schmidt. Emma Schmidt was exorcised in the 20s in Iowa, and by a really cool priest, Father Theophilus. I think he's a Capuchin monk, not unlike Padre Pio. And he had a whole team of nuns there to help him hold down the girl for the first off, because she would propel herself onto the ceiling. But also, even though she had not eaten for days and days, the stream of vomit was endless. And by the bucket load, it was just, they talk about the smell just being repulsive. And it's interesting because the demons often do create a smell. They manipulate your senses and create just this gut-wrenching smells. But one of the things exorcists will say about that, and how you know it's a demonic manifestation, is that the smell doesn't dissipate, it'll just end. So anyway, I don't know if the same can be said about the vomit, and not to be too gross, but it's just, it was a supernatural event that her body could produce all that. And that, in the movie, the jump scares that it shoots across the room, but the sheer quantity. There's also another interesting thing about a lot of these, especially these, the ones I wrote about all dealt with the exorcisms of children, is one common theme throughout these, not with Annalise Michel, she was a special case, was the involvement of Ouija boards in children. And it makes us really, we do need to be careful, not just certainly of Ouija boards, but of various other ways that sort of thing is marketed for our children to play with and to open doors that they shouldn't even be, we should be protecting them from. I wondered about what it is about Ouija boards that are so effective in a bad way. And I heard, it might have been Father Chad Ripperger answer that question finally. He said that it involves your body is the main thing, that you're asking and allowing, giving permission to an unknown force to take possession of your body and then to communicate with it. So
we likened it to automatic writing. I had a discussion with some people about Opensky, who brought in the Enneagram from South America because he was a disciple of Gurdjieff, and he brings up the Enneagram, and he had to have 9 sins and 9 virtues, and he did it all through automatic writing. And we know that the sinister forces utilize automatic writing to manipulate, because that's what it is. It's utilization of the body. And the Ouija board is definitely a type of automatic writing. Dr. Carrie Gress, in her recent book about Down with the Patriarchy or whatever it's called, kind of a new look at the women's rights movement, how Carrie Chapman Catt and some of the Seneca Falls Convention
ladies, these like founding mothers of the country, so to speak, would use, and the Smithsonian still has one of the knock tables they'd use to write the Seneca Falls Declaration. Just crazy how pandemic this sort of stuff is.
It's true. That's a good point. I mean, it's stranger than fiction, really, that these things that are so horrifying in our own imagination can become part of our lived experience. To take a sidestep into horror fiction, actually horror genre as a fiction, you had taken the opportunity to write The Seventh Word. I think that came out almost a decade ago.
Yeah, it's weird now.
Yeah. And I mean, in it, you explore this topic of horror within the ideas, honestly, similar to The Exorcist, how that novel takes an archaeological artifact, Pazuzu, a statue in its case, and then in your story, you use a mask of an Aztec demon. Can you talk about how you utilized this seventh word?
For sure, yeah. I appreciate you digging that old book up. I think it's sadly as relevant now as it was then. It's a book it's a horror fiction novel, Christian horror, that imagines what if the demon Tlaloc that the Aztecs sacrificed their children to had set up shop in America, small town America, running abortion clinics. It's just
doesn't sound like that doesn't sound like that big of a leap to me.
Yeah. Oh, it's kind of, it's got elements of Dracula and Salem's Lot, Stephen King's Salem's Lot in it, kind of that slow devouring of a small town. But yeah, it's about abortion clinics. And I think if we pull back the veil of what's really happening in abortion clinics, I don't think we'd be far off, knowing about various black masses and things that will actually take place at abortion clinics. One of the things that, speaking of truth being stranger than fiction, one of the things I added to the book that I don't know if I got pushback on it, but one of the things that maybe was a bit too far, one of the things I thought, wow, maybe this I shouldn't do, it came straight out from the news. I read about how, and I don't know, viewer advisory warning, but I read about how people, post-abortive mothers and fathers, will take glamour shot. Well, there's like a whole kind of photography, and there's people that will take photos with the body of their child. And I was like, this has to go in a horror novel. But I mean, it's difficult to write about. But ultimately, so that book is a pro-life horror novel. And I got Abby Johnson, who's kind of a friend of the family. She's from the same town I'm from. My family's been from forever, New Road. She read it, and I think she said it was genuinely terrifying. And she's seen plenty of terrifying things, but I appreciate you bringing up that book. I think, again, I was trying to be subversive, putting a horror novel like that out.
Well, no, it's apropos for today because, I mean, we've, abortion clinics and the situations associated with killing the unborn is quite pandemic, to be honest. And it reminds me of this song from the 80s. There's a musician, his name is Carmen. Well, he goes by Carmen. I think he's got a real name. That's a stage name. But he has a song, it's called Revival in the Land, and any of my non-Catholic listeners might remember this. And Satan and his demon general are having a conversation in the war room of hell. And Satan asks this question. He says, "Is there something wrong with my abortion clinics?" And the demon says, "No, sir. That's all fine. We kill 4,000 unborn a day, shall we say, through surgical removal." He says it's selective breeding. We eliminate human life in the name of convenience, like the Nazis and the Jews with the government's approval. And I think that's a real powerful statement, considering your novel and how you take this entity who loves child sacrifice, like Moloch of, the Bible, and you take him and you transplant him into a Louisiana town, and he operates his nefarious schemes out of an abortion clinic. I mean, it's what it is. And, the government approves this behavior and these actions, and therefore, why can't he feed his desires? And it's just, I mean, is it really a horror fiction, or is that horror faction?
Yeah, exactly. And I don't mean to fetishize any of this. I just think that if we are going to describe something as horror, if a book is going to self-describe itself as horror, and the horror of abortions are never addressed in any horror novel that I've ever seen, then how can we call it's got the wrong name? It's not inclusive of all horror, right? That we should properly categorize what's happening in abortion clinic.
Yeah, and and just looking over all of the books that you've written, it's clear that you might put out something that's scary, and then within a year, maybe even the same year, you're writing something for spiritual combat. You've written several books talking about the Rosary, talking about like Saint Louis de Montfort and his consecration to Jesus through Mary, and all of these things are honestly they're protecting garments that we can put on as defenses against the enemy.
Absolutely. And between Marian consecration and consecration to Jesus through Mary, consecration to Jesus through Joseph, those two, as I've dug deeper in what it means for Joseph to be terror of demons, I have more and more wanted to drape not only my family in the protective cloak of Joseph and the mantle of Mary, but all families. And this is not something I ever learned about Joseph in catechism class, mostly because I was catechized in the 80s when there was no catechism going on. But yeah, I wish we had the Baltimore Catechism. We had, like Kumbaya kind of stuff. But this was something I'd never learned about St. Joseph. I think it was probably in Father Calloway's book, but it just took some time for it to really sink in, that the reason he was called Terror of Demons is because he duped Satan. Origen in the Catechism, the Catechism quotes from Origen, who is himself quoting from St. Ignatius of Antioch, saying that Satan never knew Jesus was divine until Jesus died on the cross and came knocking at the doors of hell. And he didn't know because St. Joseph concealed this concealed the virgin birth from Satan. By taking the Blessed Mother into his home, Satan and everyone else assumed it was a normal birth and a normal marriage. And we know it was quite the opposite. It was a celibate marriage and a virgin birth. So, and even when even the demons called him Son of God, but that was also a title for King David. And if the demons actually came to figure out who Jesus really was, he would silence them, and they had to obey him. So there's just this whole drama going on in the Gospels between Joseph and Jesus and the demons that is I completely missed for a long time. And it's remarkable. And that's why we consecrate our families to Joseph, is so he'll conceal our family from Satan, from King Herod, just like he did the Christ child. So it's just amazing. And by the way, if you read in the Midrash about the cloak of Joseph's namesake, right, the patriarch Joseph, the son of Jacob, he also had a cloak, right? That coat of many colors. And that's a terrible translation, as you might imagine, of the Hebrew phrase for coat of many colors. The Hebrew phrase there is ketenet pasim. And the word pasim comes from the Hebrew word for palm, or pas. So it's a long cloak that extends to the palms and down past the ankles. So think about this in terms of Joseph. The ketenet pasim is also used in the Old Testament to describe, it's used one other time, that phrase to describe cloaks worn by the royal family. Okay, so you've got this long robe that, even in its name, focuses on the wrists and the ankles, right? It's pointing to the crucifixion, but it's also a cloak of chastity and celibacy, which also points to the most chaste spouse of the Blessed Mother, St. Joseph. But then it goes even deeper. The Midrash actually describes that this was an heirloom. The cloak that Jacob gave to his son Joseph was an heirloom. And one of the reasons his brothers hate him for it is because he got the prized family heirloom. I mean, it's elsewhere kind of described as a priestly garment, but it's an heirloom priestly garment. It had been passed from patriarch to patriarch all the way back to the beginning. That it's believed that this was Adam's own robe, and therefore also Adam's priestly garment. It's a long garment, right? Just like liturgical vestments. So this probably would carried wrapped the bones of Adam on the ark, on Noah's ark. I mean, it goes on and on what the Midrash talks about with regard to the robe. And it's amazing, the story that is we're just now understanding the full story about St. Joseph.
When I see, it's Feast of St. Joseph, that I always like to put his favorite quote down, and it's just a couple of quotation marks and some dots.
Yeah, I know. I love that he was the silent protector. It's funny, though. He, depending on how you look at it, he did have a line in Scripture. Because as foster father of Jesus, it was his legal right to name the child, right? Just like Zechariah had been struck dumb, but he only regained his speech when he said the name John. His name is John, and for John the Baptist. And same thing, twice when they don't just say in the Gospels his name is Jesus, or his name will be Jesus. It says, and you will call him Jesus. So at the bris, or whatever the ceremony, Joseph indirectly is being described as the one to say Jesus. So his one word in Scripture is Jesus. God saves. Joshua. Which is pretty awesome. If you were going to have just one word in Scripture, right, that it would be Jesus, right? The name upon which every knee shall bend, right?
There was somebody who was looking at Jerome's writings of the book of Isaiah. They were just happened to be reading the Latin Vulgate, and they noticed where it says, God is my Savior. It literally says Jesus. The Latin word for Jesus is there. So it's this real interesting tie-in that even someone back then would see that clearly in Isaiah.
Yeah. Oh, and the church fathers, and the prophets too, but the church fathers, like anytime you think you find a little kernel of typology that they haven't yet identified, you just haven't looked far enough, because they were masters.
You've also written a series of books that are called the Catholic Man Book, and they're the nice little instruction manuals, if you will, if you could take them that way, for men in the household. And I think that's really potent for today. And I've spoken to other guys about the masculine part of being, in the household. And I'm curious to hear what you have to say about this particular topic.
Yeah, it's just a shame how we've been taught that, that Joseph, though least in dignity among the Holy Family, was nonetheless the head of the Holy Family, would lead the Holy Family in prayer. Just like basically every family I've seen, the woman is much more holy than the man. But that doesn't matter, right? It's the man's job to lead the family in prayer. I don't care how holy your wife is. If she's really holy, she's going to be urging you to lead the family in prayer. And that is extremely important in terms of spiritual warfare, right? That just like Joseph conceals his family, the Holy Family, and our families, if Satan can't get to our families if we've just been to confession, are continuing to fight that good fight, avoiding the near occasion of sin, quickly getting absolved of mortal sin. We serve as a barrier to the rest of our family. I think there's no limit to how far we can go with this. I think a lot of it's been lost. Our culture, our fathers didn't really teach us this. I think we like a generation lost in space, as whatever the American Pie song says. We have to reestablish this for our families right now. Like we're in a pinch point in history. We're like the thin red line of fathers that really have to turn the ship around. And I think establishing prayer space in the family is extremely important. I think the Liturgy of the Hours teaches a great formula for this, and the Rule of St. Benedict even, that each watch of the day, right, every 3 hours is a prayer time. And maybe every no matter where you're at as a father and in your spiritual journey, you can start somewhere in that 24-hour period, right? Like maybe it's just evening prayer, and not necessarily just saying evening prayer from the Liturgy of the Hours, leading your family in that, but just say a decade of the Rosary together. Let it expand from there at noontime. Granted, this helps a lot if you're able to work from home or work near your family, and you can actually be with your family, which all the world's trying to prevent us from that. But we homeschool the kids, and I work from home as an attorney and an author, so like I can be right there with the kids and direct parent. So at noon, we say the Angelus. In the morning, we have morning prayer. I do better, when it's Exodus 90 time of the year. I get back on Liturgy of the Hours through the day, but I fall off during the year. But I'm always trying to get back on a good prayer regime. And I try to have more and more of the clock marked by prayer periods where I'm, if a lot of times we go to daily mass around noon, but if we're at home at noon, we'll say the Angelus. There's hopefully, I don't mean to be patronizing, just paternal in this, but hopefully opening up like whole new possibilities for guys that have kind of been told, no, that's the woman's job. And, there's not only the daily schedule, but the annual schedule, the liturgical calendar, right? Leading our family. And, if you just lead a little bit in this, usually the wife takes over and really reinforces what you're doing and loves it. At least that's what I've seen in my family and other families. My wife is is just awesome and encouraging this sort of liturgical behavior. So like Ember Days of fasting, Wednesday and Friday, fasting from meat, making the liturgical calendar present in the home.
It's like, look, the biblical narrative shows us that it's the father offering the sacrifices up until the Levitical priesthood comes. But there's plenty of traditional evidence that shows that it was the head of the man of the household who still offered a form of sacrifice, and that was prayer, leading the prayer.
Yeah, and bloody sacrifices too. The natural priesthood of the father before, as you said, the Levitical priesthood truncated that to just the tribe of Levi and the sons of Aaron for the high priesthood. Before that, it was every father was the priest for his family. Like every father had to procure for himself a Passover lamb to sacrifice in the Exodus, right? Every patriarch was a patriarch because he was a father first. And why did Noah bring with him 2 of every animal, but then he also brought with him 7 of particular animals, 7 pairs of particular animals, because those were animals used for the priestly sacrifice. He built, as soon as the ark hit ground, dry, they had dry land, he built an altar, right? We should have home altars. Or at least sacred spaces in our homes. Consecrate our homes and our families to Sacred Heart, right? Make a throne of our homes for Christ. And then we usually, the consecration of St. Joseph for children and families that I wrote with Father Calloway, and Dr. Carrie Gress's Marian consecration for children are both awesome, and we use those in a liturgical fashion. Usually, like one for Advent, one for maybe leading up to St. Joseph's feast day. We kind of mix it up a little bit, but it becomes a family tradition.
All right, and then the last thing that's actually kind of interesting to me, especially today, is post-apocalyptic zombies. You have an entire series of novels that you've written concerning, well, once again, you've taken, the area that you know best, that happens to be your home state of Louisiana, and you examine and explore the idea of a zombie apocalypse. What particular thing within that kind of, so not just post-apocalyptic, but zombies? Why zombies?
Well, I mean, it's been kind of a guilty pleasure of mine, I guess. I just love zombie movies, zombie stories, grew up with them. I think maybe it began because my dad and I would watch these together, and I lost my dad kind of as a young man. Interestingly, the last thing I had recorded from him, like a voicemail that I tried to keep, from phone to phone, one of the things we loved to watch when I was a kid was Dawn of the Dead, where they go to the shopping mall, which is the social commentary there is just awesome. But Dad left me a message. He was in the movie theater, and he saw the first trailer for the remake of Dawn of the Dead. And he called me in the theater and was like, Scott, do you know there's a new one that they're remaking? Anyway, so that I don't know psychologically what's going on in me that I love zombies so much. I don't know if there's a good basis for it or not, but again, I wanted to be subversive with Catholic storytelling, to take a genre that isn't particularly holy and find a way to for the incarnation to happen in that genre. So I also love church history, and always been fascinated by the Black Plague, the bubonic, Black Death, bubonic plague, and how most of entire towns disappeared in the Black Death. A third of European population would decimates just 1/10 of the population, right? This is beyond decimation of a population. There's even a cool story I came across that it wasn't until the Battle of Britain in World War II, when the Royal Air Force was flying all these missions over England, that they rediscovered entire towns that had been lost during the bubonic plague. Anyway, so I was like, well, how did civilization survive such an attack on the population, such an apocalyptic event? And the way that society survived was the monasteries preserved society, protected society, and communities grew up around the monasteries. So I wanted to take this kind of monastic salvation and bring it into the zombie apocalypse genre, which you kind of see with the Canticle of Leibowitz a little bit, but they kind of go, more pure sci-fi version, which I don't have the patience to write the kind of awesome novel that the Canticle for Leibowitz is. And so, and of course I like to put things in my own hometown, because I like to imagine I'm surviving a zombie apocalypse in my own hometown. So we have a lot of Gothic architecture, which is to say strongly built church buildings in Louisiana and all up and down Mississippi. And so these, when you look at them, these were made as castles, right? These are some of the architecture we use because it's beautiful. It was actually very effective against withstanding a siege, right? A siege of people. So we don't desecrate any churches, obviously, in the novels, but we use church buildings to as a setting for defending against zombies, and then creating a monastery-like structure, monastic-like community around the church as the seed from which civilization can come back to life. And there's liturgy of the hours, there's mass, there's all these things that are the fertilizer for civilization. And I also like to deal with the idea of the church teaching on indefectibility. That there can never be a time when you wouldn't have priest, bishop, pope, so that somehow that has to survive even in an apocalypse, or a natural apocalypse, not like an apocalypse described in the Book of Revelation. But if we were to have a natural apocalypse, the hierarchy of the church would still survive, and just playing with that in my imagination, seeing what comes out.
No, that's brilliant. I like that. That was really awesome. Well, you have a new upcoming book coming out next year. Let's talk about that for a brief moment.
Oh, yeah. It's near-death experiences.
Right. Yeah. Could we talk about your new book coming out next year, about near-death experiences, and how you gathered these stories?
Yeah, so this was really interesting. That book came from a conversation not unlike this one, but on a podcast about exorcisms with an evangelical Protestant. Sean Tabbitt, he's got a good podcast too, great guy. And he was telling me he's written a few books on near-death experiences, contemporary accounts, evangelical accounts of it. And he's like, Scott, I've done the research. There's no comprehensive Catholic treatment of near-death experiences out there. And the uniquely Catholic accounts of near-death experiences are few and far between. they're out there. A lot of them are just YouTube videos, but some are books, like Father Cedric Pisegna. I just messed that up. Anyway, so I interviewed all these guys, or a lot of them, especially the ones that were still living, and collected contemporary accounts of Catholic near-death experiences. But as I started digging, I saw that a truly Catholic approach to this subject is going to be far more far-reaching than anything out there, because you start getting into it and you realize, oh my God, Pope Gregory the Great is talking about near-death experiences in, what was that, the 4th century?
Yeah, I know it's not Pope Gregory the Ninth. He was the one who said cats are guilty of witchcraft, and then it led to the extermination of cats, which led to the rise of the bubonic plague.
I love Pius the Ninth, though, man. Anyway, so all the way back to Pope St. Gregory, who was talking about this stuff in the 7th century, 6th, 7th century, and you have Venerable Bede talking about near-death experiences, and then you have multiple saints who experienced a near-death experience, not to be redundant. St. Teresa of Avila died for several days and then came back, and it took a while, but I figured out which of her biographies one of her family members actually talked about what she revealed about that experience. St. Teresa of Lisieux sort of had a near-death experience. Padre Pio's been involved in a lot of near-death experiences, as you might expect. He is just amazing like that. And also started going into biblical near-death experiences, like Jonah. When he dies in the whale, a lot of people, the church fathers and the Midrash, the Jewish commentaries, are there's always kind of been two lines of thought: that did he survive in the whale or the great fish? One account has him basically like Captain Nemo under the sea, exploring the sea, and another account he dies. And Tertullian talks about this being proof of the bodily resurrection, that he was digested by these stomach acids. But anyway, Tertullian, I love the gross stuff. One of the accounts that Midrash has is that Jonah was actually also another person in Scripture. He was the son of the widow of Zarephath that Elijah resurrected. So that would make Jonah, not only did Jonah die, but he died and resurrected twice. And that also, it all leads into the sign of Jonah that Christ talks about. This faithless generation will receive no sign but the sign of Jonah, that of a man dying 3 days and then coming back to life, right? And also converting all these Gentiles, right? All these pagans, just like the Ninevites. So, you really start to see a lot of, when you start viewing the Bible with this lens, right? If you've only got a hammer, everything looks like a nail, but, in a respectful sense, you start looking at the Bible through this modern lens of near-death experiences, you start to see a lot of things. Even St. Paul and his stoning, right? Stoning was sophisticated, and it was meticulously designed, as described in the Mishnah, to bring about death. And he was stoned inside the city, not by a mob outside, but inside the city. And then it describes the members of the Christian community, the disciples, gathering around him and praying over his body, and then him coming back to life. So there's, we don't necessarily can't make all the logical conclusions regarding near-death experience for these people in the Bible, and we don't necessarily have them describing what they saw. But it's an interesting way to look at some of the stories of the Bible as well. So it was kind of a big job to go through near-death experiences from a Catholic point of view, because you've got contemporary accounts, historical accounts, and biblical accounts of near-death experiences. If we're going to be truly Catholic about the subject, we got our work cut out for us. And I mean, there's hopefully this is a baton I can pass to other writers, because people love to read about this subject, because people always want to know what lies beyond the veil, and it's fascinating for people. And if we're not talking about this as Catholics, we can tell a better story about this than anyone else can. And if we're not talking about it, we're missing a major opportunity for evangelization.
Where can people find more about you? I mean, things that'll they'll be in the show notes.
Well, you can always check out my blog, thescottsmithblog.com, so I have no creativity. You can always see kind of what I'm working on next by my blog posts. That's always kind of my proving ground for ideas and research. You know, I love biblical research. And so that's all there, thescottsmithblog.com. You can find all my books on Amazon, or, you know, wherever you buy your books, maybe a holier place. We're in a lot of Catholic bookstores, and, you know, more growing all the time, but that's, it's kind of, there are a lot of individual bookstores out there. It's hard to reach them all. I have the publisher website for a lot of those books is holywaterbooks.com. The NDE, Near-Death Experience book, is going to be published by Sophia Institute next year. The book I wrote with Father Calloway, you can find through Marian Press. But again, you can find them all on Amazon as well. But go to the publisher whenever possible. That always helps good Catholic publishers.
Well, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate you coming on the show. It's a great conversation.
Absolutely. Thanks for all your excellent questions.
Thank you for listening. This is a free podcast based upon the value for value model. If you find value in this, or any episode, you can return that value by liking the show, subscribing to this channel, leaving a review, or sharing with a friend on your social media accounts. You can also donate on my website. Thank you again. This is BT for Truth and Shadow Podcast. You are the light in the darkness.